We are ending this series called Ready or Not, and the whole premise behind this series was, here comes 2021. Whether you're ready or not, it's coming, and everything that comes with 2021 is coming. And so I don't know how well you're doing so far. I know some people are doing better than others. And so we're going to end this series today, and our mission here at Relevant Church, we say, is to help people far from God reach their full potential in Jesus Christ. And so I'm excited to start a brand new series next week. It's called Crazy Love, and we're talking about all things relationships, not just marriage relationships, but it'll be fun. We will hit that. Valentine's Day is on a Sunday. All you lovebirds, y'all need to be in church, and we're excited about that series. But today, I just want to end this series with just talking about what are some things that we need to do, that we need to wrestle with, decisions that we need to make to reach our full potential in Jesus Christ. Now, I'll tell you this, a lot of times the younger generations get all torn up about potential. And here's why, because we haven't arrived yet. What do you mean there's potential? You mean I'm not good enough? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just simply saying that if you're still on this earth, God's not done with you yet. And when God is done with you, he'll take you home if you're a follower of Jesus. And so at the end of the day, I don't want you just to come into a relationship with God. Maybe you're watching, you've tuned in online, or you're here and you don't have a relationship with God, but you're kind of searching, you're trying to figure. I don't want you just to take a step into that relationship with God. I actually want you to continue on that journey until you reach. We're not trying to reach a destination. We're trying to reach a potential that God has put inside of us. And so we have to be prepared to do that along the way. So here's my question for you. All of us have different ways of preparing, right? Some of y'all loved, any nerds in the house, like you studied for your tests? Anybody? No, we got all the people that are dumb, right? And so anybody, like you just winged it and you only studied if you had to? Any of y'all go to school? I mean, y'all aren't participating. It's one of those days. All right, so here's the thing. Me and my wife prepare for things differently. My oldest son and my youngest son prepare for things differently. So for me, when it comes to like Sunday mornings, guys, you know this to be true, right? She has started the night before. Like her brain, like about 5 o'clock, her brain, I got to get my shower. I got to do this. I got to lay out my clothes. I got to iron my clothes. I got to do this. And you know, like she's preparing for the whole day. And then she thinks about what are we doing after church? And where are we going to lunch? And I'm like, I'm just trying to get through the day, you know? And then guys, you know this to be true about us. We roll out of bed, whatever day it is, and we walk into our closet like it's the first time we ever saw anything in there. We're just like, I don't even know what I got to wear. Any of y'all like me, you get out, like I know there's like 30 minutes from the time I get out of bed till I can walk out the door. And if anything goes wrong, I'm screwed, right? We have different ways of preparing. And my oldest, he's like, he needs like 35 minutes. And if I wake him up 30 minutes or his mom wakes him up 30 minutes early, he's like, you didn't wake me up in time. My youngest, he needs like 30 seconds to get ready. This morning, true story, on the way to church, first of all, he took a shower last night and he didn't get his hair dry, and you know what that looks like, right, parents? Like you lay on the pillow and so he has it spiky in the back and spiky in the front, and then this is like laid down across, and I'm like, and his mom sends him in there to me this morning because I was in the bathroom there. She said, have your dad fix your hair. Now, first of all, that's trouble in and of itself, but when it's like this, it's even worse. So he rolls up in there and I fix his hair or mess it up more to match, and we spray it because he don't like all that stuff, and so I get in the car. And when I get in the car, I look back and he's got his hoodie on his head. He don't care. He just does not care. And we'll say, we're leaving in 5 minutes. You need to get your clothes on. I'm ready. And we'll say, all right, let's go. And he go, I got to put my shoes on. Y'all got totally does not. So he's never prepared when he needs to be. He's always the culprit of us being late. He's always the thing that caused. Now, my other one, he's sitting there checking the sports reel after he's ready because he's got that extra 2 minutes built into his time. We all have different ways of preparing. And so I know this. We don't just arrive at our full potential without making plans in preparation to do so. And so there's so many of us that are wandering through life. We go to church on Sundays. We do this. We might drop an offering in or drop a tithe in. We might serve. We might love on our community. But we just kind of meander through life, and we're not always prepared for the steps that God has for us. And so I want to just take you back to Romans chapter 12. We've been focusing on this. And actually in the Good Life, you guys are going to make the turn and talk about this particular verse here in the coming weeks. I want to read you 3 verses, and then we're going to look at a man in the Old Testament by the name of Moses to kind of give you snapshots of how this can play itself out in our life. Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, Paul, who's a follower of Jesus, who did not serve God, but had an encounter with Jesus after he murdered and killed Christians. Jesus changes his life, the resurrected Christ. He has an encounter, boom. He all of a sudden now says, I see who Jesus really is. I'll quit persecuting people who say they follow this man. And now he begins to start churches all over the world. And in Romans, he tells the church at Rome this. He says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, in other words, in view of the fact that God has been good to you when you didn't deserve it, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing unto God. This is your true and proper worship. In other words, worship is not showing up and lifting your hands. Worship is not singing out loud. It is giving your life, your soul, your spirit, giving everything you have. Present your body a living sacrifice. So daily we sacrifice our desires and our wants to follow Jesus. He goes on to say, do not conform. We've been talking about this one over the last 2 weeks. To the pattern of this world. But be transformed, meaning from one thing to another, from the cocoon to the butterfly. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So everything starts in your mind. If we don't have our mind right, our behaviors will never follow. So we've been focusing on our mind the last few weeks. He says, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. When I tell you we want you to reach your full potential, what I am saying to you is that I want you to fulfill God's will for your life. So if you and I want to fulfill God's will, we want to reach our full potential, his perfect will. He tells us specifically, we don't conform to the patterns of this world. We're transformed by a new way of thinking. And then he says, let me tell you how you ought to think. For by the grace given to me, I say to you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought to. This is interesting because you can have what we call humble pride. You can be prideful and haughty, or you can think you're too good for, or like you're so broken that you can, like I'm too prideful to actually get help. Some people take pride on the mountain, other people take pride in the valley. You can be just as prideful as a victim or a person of trauma. And what I mean by that is you're so prideful that we say, no, that can't help me. No, that'll never get me to the next step. No, I'll never deal with that. And on the other side, we come from a great home. We have this situation, everything's going right in our life, and we say, no, we don't need anything else. He says, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. Throw it back up. He says, but, go back to that slide, Romans chapter 12. He says this, but rather think of yourselves with sober judgment, a clear mind, in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. In other words, Romans tells us all throughout the book, you cannot earn your salvation. It is a free gift from God. Don't ever think that you stand firm and you've made it to where God has for you, because once you've reached your full potential, once you've known God's will, once you understand what it is that God has for you, then that's when you can live out your full potential. And then when it's over, when you've reached that potential in your life and you fulfilled everything God has in store for you, that's when Jesus takes you home. And so here's the situation happening in the Old Testament that I want us to look at in Moses' life. There's 4 things we're going to look at from Moses' life, but I want to tell you a little bit about his history in order to give you a couple of thoughts. Moses was one of the children, he's a Hebrew boy, who ultimately in slavery in Egypt, Pharaoh had decided he wanted to kill all the Israelite boys at an early age. So if they had a boy, he said, I want you to throw them in the Nile River, because he was so concerned that the Israelites would rise up and come to power, and they would rise up an army and basically overthrow them. And so he said, I want you to kill all the baby boys, throw them in the river. Well, you can read it in Genesis. And he said, basically what happens here is that Moses, all throughout Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, you see Moses' imprint on all of history. Moses is all of a sudden put in a basket, floats down the river. He's picked up by Pharaoh's daughter. She sees this baby, has compassion on him, adopts him now into her family. So now Moses becomes the grandson of the most powerful man in the world. And he would ultimately be called to lead the children of Israel out of captivity. But I want you to listen to how he thought of himself. Hebrews chapter 11 in the New Testament tells us how Moses, who could have thought of himself more highly than he ought, actually viewed himself, and we're going to learn from it today. It says this in Hebrews chapter 11. By faith, when Moses had grown up, listen, he refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. In other words, he refused to be known as royalty. It goes on to say, he chose to be mistreated with all the people of God rather than enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. So he could have taken advantage of his status. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as greater value than the treasures of Egypt. And here's the fourth one, because he was looking ahead to his reward. And here's the fourth one we're going to look at today. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. What what does that mean? Okay, I want to walk you through 4 basic thoughts from this passage. 4 choices that Moses made that you and I will need to make in order to reach our full potential in Jesus Christ. Here they are. Number 1, we have to discover our true identity. It says, you ever walked up to somebody and thought they were somebody they weren't? So we were, anybody been to the store in like Fort Valley, Buc-ee's? Anybody been there? Some of y'all drive for like vacation down to Buc-ee's, right? So we were down in Warner Robins this weekend, and we actually drove down to Buc-ee's just to see it, and because we were heading to Warner Robins. And the place is a madhouse. It's like the Sam's of all store, like 100 gas tank pumps, and we're there. And they're putting out barbecue sandwiches by the ton. I mean, they're just throwing them out there, and you're like, $6, and people are snatching them like they're no tomorrow. And twice, this girl walked by me, and like I almost talked to her because she was like the same height. She looked like Julie. She shaped like Julie. She had almost the same clothes on, and I almost said hello to her. And I thought to myself, that would have been awkward. Hey, babe, how you? Oh, God, can you imagine? Pastor harasses girl in Buc-ee's, whatever. Okay, so mistaken identity can get you in trouble, can it? And now we got to wear this 6-inch thing over our face? I see people all the time, and I'm like, you got to pull this down, but I don't know who you are. And so what happens is, if we're not careful, it's funny to think about stories of people mistaking other people's identity, but what happens when you mistake your own identity? When you don't know who you are. So let me give you a couple thoughts. So here's what tends to happen. Let's just say this represents you, your life, and your identity. What tends to happen is we don't know who we were created to be and what God's plan for our life is because we don't truly understand who we are. And so Moses was royalty, but he realized that was not his true identity. His true identity was not that he was the son of Pharaoh's daughter, the grandson of the most powerful man in the world. I don't know about you, but oftentimes it's easy for me to put my identity in what I do. So that's an example of some things that we do. We'll say, well, I'm a carpenter, I'm a plumber, I own my own business. For some of us, we'd say, I'm a dad, I'm a mom, I'm a grandparent. For some in this room and watching online, you would say, you know what? I was abused as a child. My parents were divorced. My dad was an alcoholic. I've made all these terrible choices. And before you know it, we've filled our entire identity. All of a sudden, we've identified with what we've struggled with or what has happened to us. And so we have this idea of who we are that's not based on anything about who God says you are. Now, let me pause and say this. If you're not a follower of Jesus, this is what you carry around. Our sin, our brokenness. We don't have an identity in Christ if we haven't made Jesus the center of our life. If we haven't said, I died to my old self, I want to follow you with my life. And so we walk around full of stuff that God never intended. And so for Moses, he could have easily said, look, I was abandoned by my parents. I was put in a river. Now I'm this. He could have identified as a whole bunch of things, statuses or experiences in his life. And he could have filled himself up with this idea that he is what everybody says he is. Now listen, bullying is a very real thing in our culture today. It's not just in middle school and high school, though. It's in elementary school. It's online when you're 25. It's on forums and Facebook and social media. I mean, people say things. And so before you know it, you can start believing things about yourself that aren't who God says you are. And so here's the problem. If we say, ready or not, here comes 2021. I'm being transformed by a new way of thinking. One of the greatest things you have to do is know who you are. It says this, by faith, when Moses had grown up, he refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Why is this important? Because God would use Moses to lead the children of Israel out of slavery from Egypt. If he had identified as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, the grandson of Pharaoh, he never would have fulfilled his full potential. He never would have stepped into the calling and the purpose that God had for him. 1 Thessalonians tells us our purpose is to please God, not people. He is the one who examines the motives of our heart. But so many times, this is what we filled our life with, what people say, what's happened to us, what our occupation. I'm a sports. I'm a sports. I love sports. I'm a sports commentator. I'm an athlete. I'm a businessman. I'm a wife. I'm a grandmother. I'm a grandfather. I'm a broken, abused victim. Whatever it is, wherever you find your identity. And if you and I are going to fully understand who we are, we've got to replace this identity with something greater. So I want to show you. So what happens is, God says to you, maybe this is the state of mind that you're in. Maybe this is the season of life that you're in right here. Too many people live their life wondering why life sucks so bad, and they've never truly understood who they were. Identity is a very real hot button word in our culture, isn't it? So do we just say we are what culture says we, or Romans tells us, do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by a new way of thinking. So in order to do that, God says, if you'll allow me to come into your life, if you'll allow me to come into your hearts and your minds, I will begin to move in your life and replace the things in your life that have overtaken you. But you see, what happens is, too often, we won't allow God to pour himself into us. And so this entire series, we have said, okay, God, if we're going to reach our full potential, what do we got to do? One step at a time. One step at a time. But too many times, we fill ourselves up with all the things the world says we are. Now hear me, I can't even get them in there. We fill ourselves up with this, and then we come to church, and we say, okay, God, we're going to give you a chance. And then it doesn't happen fast enough. And so we get frustrated and we say, God, I'm still struggling. I still got these issues. And we quit, don't we? Or we come to church and we come in with the idea of, God, fix all my problems, don't change me. And God says, no, you can't just show up and do a little bit. That didn't have much impact, did it? And so we do a little more. And what happens is, somewhere along the way, people begin to get frustrated because they aren't experiencing what they thought they would experience just when they said, okay, God, I'm going to give my life to you. But you know what the scripture tells us about ourselves? It says that once you say yes to Jesus, you're a son or a daughter of God. Meaning that everything that Jesus has access to, you have access to. Meaning that you're not just some person trying to survive life, but God says, if you'll allow me, it's going to take some time, it's going to take some work, and it might take longer than you want it to. But somewhere along the way, I'll begin to make a difference, and you'll begin to see the difference in your life. But here's the problem. What's recognized? If you're sitting back on the back, what do you notice? This, right? You notice what's here. You don't notice what's here. What's the point? If we're not careful, we'll live our life in a frustrated state because we're not willing to do the hard things and say, I'm not identified by my childhood. I'm not identified by my abuse. I'm not identified by my divorce. I'm not identified by my addiction. I'm not identified by my shame. Do you see where we're going? You'll never step into your full potential until you say, okay, God, whatever it takes, do whatever you can to motivate me to do the things that I need to do to allow you to move inside of my life, to take all the junk from the past out. All right? And you'll never understand how to do that until you recognize, first of all, when I say, God, I ask you to forgive me my sins, be Lord of my life, I'm going to turn from my past and I'm going to follow you. At that moment, you enter into a relationship with God, and God says, you are my son, you are my daughter, and that's when things begin to change. That's not when we show up for church and we do our church stuff. It's when things have to change from the inside. Here's the second thing. It says, choose short-term pain for long-term gain. You see, we want immediate results. We want it to happen overnight. I saw this quote the other day, and I was like, man, this is so true. Most people spend more time planning a vacation than they do planning their life. I mean, you'll look for 3 years on your dream vacation, won't you? We're going to go to Europe one day, and then COVID hits, right? You got it all planned and COVID hits. Anybody lose a vacation last year? Come on. Still waiting on my 20-year anniversary. It says Moses chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. In other words, I'm going to do the hard things, not take the easy way out. I have this little beagle dog, and she likes to eat. And so we had a dog that lived with us for about a year while some family built a house, and we didn't realize, we just noticed that the dog, she was getting fatter and fatter and the other dog was getting skinnier and skinnier. And she's a little one. And so she eats one time a day, because if she eats twice a day, for whatever reason, it doesn't sit well. And so she would eat in the morning. He would eat twice a day, the other dog. And so we would feed him in the morning, and she would go in there and take his food. Then we would feed them both at night, and she would eat. He was a slow eater. She was a scarfer. You remember the illustration last week? She was the kid that stuffed the marshmallow, okay? So she would eat all of hers and then jump over to his, and within like 6 months, she went from this cute little beagle to like a lard bucket. It was bad. So we got her, this is cruel, but it's so funny. Y'all ever seen them slow feeder bowls? This poor dog now, if you just, I should video it just so y'all can see it. Literally, it's if you don't know it, I should have brought it, but like it's just like a maze. And the idea is that the food falls down in there, and she's got to do all this stuff to slow down her eating so that she'll get full faster. Because if she eats so fast that she doesn't even realize she's full, so she keeps eating. And now, she's lost like 20 pounds. I mean, it's crazy. Like, I looked at her the other day, I'm thinking, is she going, I mean, at this rate, by the end of 2021, she's going to disappear. But she literally went from like obese, fat beagle dog to people would come over and be like, what are y'all, did she eat the other dog? I mean, what happened? And now she's like lean and fit, and she's like 2 years older. What am I saying? It is painful. I don't know how to draw a spiritual illustration for this, but I'm trying. It is painful sometimes for that dog. And you'll hear it. You'll hear the thing scraping the floor. And then it'll go back. And for about 15 minutes, it used to take us about 15 seconds. She's like, and it was gone. And now it takes her like 15 minutes. Here's the problem, church. We sometimes eat like she does. And I don't mean food. Some of y'all are fast. Get your mind off food. What I'm saying is we just see something and we have no self-control and we just scarf it down. And before you know it, it becomes our identity. And it's painful to eat out of a slow feeder bowl. You look ridiculous. And you're like, who's watching me? What are they saying? I look like an idiot. I'm doing hard things. But you choose short-term pain for long-term gain. But the church in America has abandoned that. Churches overseas many times haven't. You go to a third world country and watch their relationship with God blossom. You go to a third world country and watch them. They'll take paper and find some extra tape, and they'll make their own soccer balls, and they'll be running around without shoes on. Happiest kids in the world. Mindset. You go over to these countries that are in poverty, that have found a relationship with Jesus, and these kids and these families are so gracious and grateful, and you'll go over and they'll want to serve you. Because they've learned that temporary satisfaction and for one, they haven't experienced that like we have. So they're not addicted to it, and it hasn't become who they are. And so I wish somehow there was a spiritual slow feeder bowl for all of us. That whatever it is, that you can't have self-control, God would say, slow down, choose short-term pain so that you can have long-term gain. Romans chapter 5, we can have joy in our troubles because we know these troubles produce patience. And patience produces character. And character produces hope. Hope. 2 Corinthians, Paul writes to the church at Corinth, he says, these present troubles are quite small and won't last very long. They produce for us an immeasurably great glory that will last Forever. He says, every single time when you're tempted, every single time when you want to just do what you want to do, every single time, and you can go back and apply this over 2020, and you can see how many times we did what we wanted to do versus what God had for us, can't you? I can go back through my teenage years and my young adult years and my early marriage years and yesterday and go, failed at that one. Failed at that one. But God says, choose short-term pain in order to experience your full potential in the long term. Number 3, embrace God's values, not the world's. Embrace God's values and not the world's. You can't do this without knowing your true identity, though. When you identify as something that God says you never were, in other words, you don't identify as a child of God, then you don't know how to fight the world's value system, do you? And so we find ourselves constantly trying to fill ourselves because we haven't allowed God's presence, God's power, God's purposes to fill our lives. Hebrews 11:26 goes on to say, Moses regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. He is the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He is the grandson of the most powerful man in the world, yet he chose to be disgraced rather than sitting in a posh palace somewhere because God had a greater purpose and God had a greater plan. And I hate talking about 2020 versus 2021. So this is the last week I'm going to talk about it because we're in this transition series. But too many people gave up quickly when times got tough in America because they didn't understand that everything is not always going to be perfect like maybe culture tells us. And when things go south, we'll just go and pacify ourselves. We'll go fill ourselves with other worldly value system things. 1 John chapter 2, John says, do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, I'm going to break these 3 things down. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. Let's tackle those. He says, the world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of the Father lives forever. So we're going to review these. Here they are. The world's value system. Let me give them to you really quickly. Passion and pleasures. The lust of the flesh. Teenager, single person. This applies to your romantic relationships. Men, this applies to what you're engaging in with your eyes and your thought process. Ladies, it applies to what you're engaging in and your reading in your mind and the fantasies. He says, don't have any part of that. Food. You know, we can have addictions to food, can't we? Alcohol. Drugs, whatever your addiction of choice is. He says, the lust of the flesh, passion and pleasures. We're beginning a new series called Crazy Love next week. We're going to talk about the relationship side of this. In that series, we'll talk about sex. We'll talk about all the things that husbands and wives and single people and divorced people and single again people deal with. Here's the second one, possessions and treasures. The lust of the eyes, right? So we got the lust of the flesh. My body tells me I want. Lust of the eyes is that covet. I see this, man. I want what he has. I want what she has. I want that house. I want that boat. I want that job. You see how this plays itself out? This is stuff. This is money. This is materialism. And we are the guiltiest, if not the guiltiest, one of the guiltiest countries in the world with this mindset. And here's the third one. He says, position and measures. This is the pride of life. I want status. I want a career. I want to be a professional athlete. I'm going to make sure I put the right filters on all my Instagram posts because I want to. Look, nothing's wrong with those things. Nothing's wrong with any of those things. In fact, when I want my kid to have a career. Now, if we're seeking status, that's different. I don't know what the careers will be. I want them to be what God wants them to be. I want them to pursue what God has, both of them. But at the end of the day, what I don't want them to do is to pursue these things for worldly pleasures or worldly gains. There's a greater cause at work, and that is that they would step into their full potential and change the world. I didn't put these on the screen, but you may want to write them down. Peace of mind is more valuable than passion or pleasure. Hear me. Do you know why I believe, this is not in the Bible, and I'm not a clinical psychologist, I'll just tell you my opinion. Why I believe anxiety is through the roof. Of course, there's some systematic causes for those things, but I think many times is we don't have any peace in our mind because we've been seeking the lust of our flesh. I'm not saying that's every time, so don't write me no email, because we'll just, if you do, send it to carl@idon'tcare.com. It's fine, okay? But I'm not responding to it. What I'm saying to you, though, is even if we struggle, whatever we struggle with, we can definitely reduce that if we'll find the Prince of Peace. And we'll rest in him and let our identity rest in him. Here's the second thing. People are more valuable than possessions or treasures. You know, 89% of people say that when they get to the end of their life, what's the one thing they regret the most? The one thing they'd have spent more time doing. You know what they don't say? Well, I wish I'd have built a bigger house. I wish I'd had a boat. I wish I'd have done this, or I wish I had a vacation home. I'm not saying anything's wrong with those things. What they say is, I wish I'd have spent more time with the people I loved. I wish I could go back and tell my son, my kids, my wife. Is there anything you want to say before you leave it? Tell the people I love them. People are more valuable than possessions or treasure. And can I tell you, people are the heart of God? Some of you aren't good husbands, you aren't good wives, you aren't good parents or grandparents, or you aren't good kids. I hate to say it that way, but because you're so focused on fulfilling your own wants and desires that you can't even live out the calling God has for you and love the people closest to you, much less love the world. And here's the last one. God's purpose is more valuable than position or measures. This is contrary to the American mindset. Can I tell you, and you can watch it on Netflix, I'm not 100%, I don't agree with 100% of it, but about 95% of it I do. The American gospel has brought Christianity down. Let me tell you something. There is no such thing as prosperity gospel. That if you'll just do this, then God will. Let me tell you something. If it won't preach everywhere, it shouldn't preach anywhere. If it can't preach in Africa where people are starving and dying without water, don't preach it because we're Americans. Put that one in your pipe and smoke it on the way home. Because some of y'all think because we're Americans, we should have more privilege. People all across the world are dying and hurting, and we can't get past what we want. Here's the last one. Decide to live by faith, not by fear. Decide to live by faith. That was an easy slogan to say in the middle of COVID, right? It's like, just let's put signs up, let's do, I just saw it everywhere. I saw it everywhere, all over the world, all over Instagram, all over faith and fear. How, though? What do you just flip the faith? I mean, you got two switches. It's like, which pill do you want, blue or red? I mean, what do you do? It says, by faith, Moses left Egypt. What did he do? He took a step. Because my next step is not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who was invisible. I love what our student ministry's been doing in this recent series, by the way, man. A fun time they had Wednesday night. You need to get your students here on Wednesday nights. Pastor Daniel did an illustration this Wednesday, and you can go watch it online. But he said something 2 weeks ago. We have our youth XP, which is our large group, about an hour-long service, and hang out, fun once a month. And then we have our small, just shortened messages and then small groups every other night. And then they have some hangout time. But he said something that just hit me. I was sitting right back here in the risers on that Wednesday night, and he said, in America, we are obsessed with the shallow. He said, you know how when we go to the pool as a kid or when we get older, especially if we don't really know how, we're not the best swimmers, that would be me, and we go to, and what's the first question we ask? How deep is it? Can we touch the bottom? Because we want it easy, right? Let's be honest. If it's too deep, I want to float. And he said, we spend too much, we say we want to do things for God, but it's almost like we go to the kiddie pool, and we say, God, use me right here. And he goes, okay. Moses could have stayed in the kiddie pool, but he said, I can't let fear of what's outside or of the deep, of the hard things, slow me down. I just think this life should be a life of adventure. As a follower of Jesus, if it's not uncomfortable, then maybe it's time to take a step. A life of adventure. I love ziplining. Anybody like ziplining? True story. I got a friend of mine. I won't tell you his name. He's told the story here before when he spoke for me. He could beat me up. I ain't gonna lie. He could hurt me. And so I'll just go and preface it by that. And so I planned a big group of church planters who started churches, a retreat one time, and we went ziplining. Well, I didn't know he was scared of heights. And so I was making fun of him the whole time because he couldn't beat me up there because he was scared. And so, but no, like the reality is, I think it was a small little, we were just doing it on the kiddie course, the training course. And it was one of those where they didn't clip you in. You actually had to work together as a team. You had to clip yourself. You go to banding meals over that side of the state, okay? And you clip, unclip, and then you better clip one before you unclip the other. Or, sorry, bro, you know? And so you would come to a tree where, this is just a practice round. You get to the tree, and you would have to say, you have to talk, and you would have to unclip one, clip it to the next one on the other side of the tree, make sure it was secure, then your partner would unclip the other one and hand it to you, right? And true story, love this dude to death, and hanging out with him this summer, and I've never seen, this guy's like 6'3", just big, strong, I mean, like, he would come into that little 20-foot zip line. That's all it was. Now, keep in mind, we're preparing for a 2,500-foot zip line. And he would tree hug that mug. He would just be like, oh, God. And like we were having to clip him the whole time. And it was hilarious to me until we got done, and I was like, my bad, bro, I'm sorry, you know? But like, I say all that not to, because I ain't going to tell you his name. I'm not going to point fingers at him. But I say all that to say, so many times, I think that's how we live our life. Oh, God. I mean, we were only 12 feet off the ground at one time. You'll never experience the thrill of what it means to reach your full potential if you stay in the kiddie pool. I never forget, I love whitewater rafting. Funny story, another pastor friend, we were on a whitewater rafting, and he wasn't the most fond of it, but he decided to do it. And I've never been with anybody who's been thrown out of the boat until that day it happened to be him, which is great. And I remember having to reach over the side. And this was funny because they were like, they teach you how to do this, and you're like, nah, it'll never happen. So I don't pay attention to those things. And so, because I'm always like playing with the gear, you know, trying to figure out, you know, so giving people wedgies, you know, all that stuff. And so he falls over, and he's a bigger guy than me too. And I remember going, he's in my, like, it's on me now. Because, like, you know how they put, like, the heavy people in the front and the back or something, the other people in the middle, I don't know. He was over. And I was like, if I don't rescue him, he gone. And we'll hopefully catch him downstream. And so I throw the paddle out, and he grabs the paddle, and I pull him in. I'll never forget grabbing, and it was like 1, 2, 3, and I pulled him over my head, and we almost both went off the other side. To this day, we laugh about that. You know where it wasn't experienced? On the couch. It wasn't experienced in a comfortable area. Sometimes I think God says, get in the boat. What did he tell Peter? Push out into deep water. Because that's where he would preach to the masses. God spoke to me, I think, middle of December. And it's clear as day. I felt like God was saying, this year's the year you're going to have to do hard things. I was like, okay. And then within a couple days, a very tough decision presented itself. And then, obviously, decisions that are being made for the church. And, you know, people, I don't know if you know this, people have opinions. And they ain't afraid to share them. You're just trying to do what's best for people to experience wholeness and healing in the body of Christ. That's why we have online and connect with our audience online, and we have some virtual groups that are happening to help people take next steps and counseling and all the different things. But over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks, I felt God say specifically, this is not just for you, it's for our church. We got to do some hard things. But we can't just stand up here and preach do hard things as a group. We actually all got to leave and go out and do hard things ourselves. It says Moses left Egypt. You know what he did? He put a target on his back. Because as he's leading the children of Israel, guess who's coming after him? The Egyptians. And you know they want to take his life. And then miracle after miracle after miracle of the hand of God, the Red Sea parting, they just crossed on dry. I mean, you just see God show up, but he did not show up when they were comfortable. I mean, he's there all the time. He just decides if he's going to flex, right? So here's my thing. You want God to show up in your life? Deal with this crap. All the things you thought you were, things that happened to you, places you've placed your identity, and realize I am a child of God, and that means I got to step out of my comfort zone and do hard things. Just like Jesus, and I'll end with this, had everything in heaven. Do you know Jesus coming to earth, being born in humanity and human flesh, you know what he didn't do? It's the Bible says, he did not consider equality with God something to be grasped or to take pride in. But he humbled himself. He humbled himself to death. But not just any death, the most humiliating death in all of history, death on a cross. Do you see the parallel here? He left where the comfort zone was, stepped into the brokenness of humanity and said, I love you enough to make a way to show you that you still have value in spite of what you've been through. So if you want to prepare for 2021, you got to do some hard things. I'm telling you, and we're working and we're talking in the coming weeks about how to open up more counseling opportunities, because it's been really cool to see some of you guys take incredible steps. Those of you in the good life, don't get halfway through and realize it's hard. We told you it was hard when you signed up. Do hard things. Take the step that God has for you. Let me pray for you. God, we love you today. And there are people, even as we're talking, you're beginning to lay things on their hearts and their minds about what are the things that we need to do, the steps we need to take. I pray that as we walk out of here today, we wouldn't just think about them and write them down. We'd actually leave Egypt, not fearing the punishment or the pain, but trust that you have our best interest at heart, and we're willing to go through some stuff to help you, for you to allow us to reach our full potential. If there's people, God, watching online that are struggling right now and they don't know how to take their next steps and what to do, God, I just pray that you would let the peace of God enter their home and take this, whatever step it is you put in their mind and their heart. Email the office, do whatever they got to do to talk to somebody to find wholeness and healing in their life so that we can be more prepared for what God has for us. God, we love you, and we thank you for sending your son, Jesus, so that we can make our hearts and our lives right with you by putting our trust and faith in him. In Jesus' name.